They were waiting. Jesus was on the footsteps of the temple. They were the religious leaders, the ones who possessed authority, the chief priests and elders, the Pharisees and scribes. And they knew what Jesus had been doing. And they understood that what he was doing, what he had been doing, challenged their status and power. Who does he think he is? By what right does he do these things? Tensions mount and things get heated. Not wanting to have things flare up again after an earlier confrontation, Jesus had left the city, but now he is once more at the temple. His return has stirred their wrath. Who is he to challenge long-held beliefs? How dare he turn over the money changers' tables? How dare he protest that this sacred space should welcome the unclean, the blind, the poor, the lame, even children? For God's sake, he's got nerve. So they come demanding, wanting to know, except they really don't want to know. They just want him to stop. Stop acting like the child of God he knows he is. Stop acting like he belongs to God. Stop claiming authority. Stop healing. Stop prophesying like John the Baptist. Just stop. Their struggle and conflict and tension so thick, as my mom would have said, you could cut it with a knife. Jesus teaches, sharing stories of God's kingdom and God's kingdom coming into fruition on earth as it is in heaven. In God's realm, all things are possible. Nothing is impossible. As the universe expands while the Spirit of God and the wisdom of God become alive in us. What we think, we are sure, we believe and know about God and the ways of God's kingdom, Jesus transforms. And the chief priest and the elders and some of the influential families of the temple, they just plain don't care for Jesus or what he has to say. Truth told, they are respected. They are responsible for seeing that society's standards, their standards, are upheld. Their sphere of influence requires that they maintain standards of decency and appropriate behavior. And they, and only they, have the right and duty to authorize who legitimately can teach. But hold on. Lest we get too far ahead of ourselves. Don't we act very much the same way? Don't we depend on our elders and teachers and priests to do exactly what this group challenging Jesus does? We need responsible people who have gone through processes of education and credentialing to authorize future leaders and caregivers in our world. As I shared with a group of clergy colleagues during Bible study, let's not be too hasty in over-identifying with Jesus in this narrative. Truth told, once again, if we can be likened to anyone, we more closely resemble the group that challenges Jesus, more so than Jesus, who is being challenged. We hope we are like Jesus, more like Jesus, and our hope is real. But more often than not, what we hope for remains dormant as a latent hunger to be realized, as we realize that we aren't always as open to God as we want. Those challenging Jesus have a right to challenge. Lingering in the background of their minds is John the Baptist, whose mantle Jesus has taken up and expanded. John preached, God's kingdom is near. Change your minds, change your hearts, receive God's gospel. And Jesus took what John taught and transformed it, adding experiences of healing, refreshment, and restoration. By welcoming and sharing food and drink and meals with anyone in need, Jesus claims authority. The same authority that John had, authority that comes from God. Authority that the least of these recognize as credible, because it turns out that while Jesus is doing what he is doing, the people know God's salvation is at hand. Salvation is drawn near despite the fact that no one among the influential and societally sanctioned authorities, no one except perhaps Jesus' cousin John, has said that it is okay for Jesus to be doing what he was doing. Now, we believe that Jesus is really the Messiah, the one whom we and all Israel had been hoping for. But they don't see Jesus this way, at least not yet. And for now, they, the elders and scribes, the influential families of the temple and the Pharisees, wonder, who does Jesus think he is? They want to know, but their questions come with a snare. If answered directly, Jesus may say more than one should. So, taking the rabbis' perennial response, Jesus responds to their question with a question. A quick aside. One of my rabbi friends, upon discovering this pattern, tells the story of a confirmand asking, Rabbi, why is it when someone asks you a question, you always respond with a question? To which the rabbi responded, so, what's the matter with a question? Jesus answers their question with a question. John's baptism, was it from heaven? That is, was it from God, or was it of human origin? They debate amongst themselves, fearing that if they say that John's baptism is of human origin, the people who believe that John is a prophet will unleash their wrath. And if they say John's baptism is of divine origin, that is, that it is from heaven, from God, then Jesus and the crowd will challenge them, asking, why then do you not heed John when he says, God's kingdom has drawn near? Filled with anxiety and insecurity, they resolve to say nothing. So they answer, we don't know. Well, says Jesus, then I won't tell you. But here's the story. What do you think about this? There were two children whose parent asked them to do some work in the vineyard. The first child said no. But then, changing their mind and feeling bad about the way they had answered their parent, they went on and did the work. Going to the second child, the parent did the same. The child said yes, they would work. But then they did not do it. Which of the two did as their parent willed? In a society based on honor and shame. It turns out that both children are shameful, dishonorable, disreputable. The first, who says no, hurts his father publicly and shames him by saying blatantly no. The second hurts his father by trying to save face and at least at first not doing what would amount to public shame. But in a small town, everything one does is known. And so when he says yes and then doesn't go, he also shames his father. Which of the two? The crowd, hearing the one who has done the work, says the first. Which of the two? You and I wonder which child we might be likely to be, but the truth is, we're likely to be like either. Like both, perhaps, at the same time. Sometimes saying, no, I don't want to do it. And sometimes saying yes to save face, but then deciding we're not going to do it anyway. Jesus wants those who take up God's kingdom and God's way to understand that the way of God requires a different way of approaching and understanding and seeing the world. God's kingdom turns everything upside down. And so the parable, it turns out, is a way of reinforcing what Jesus has said before. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Those who listen to God, who obey God's will, who do the things that are part of God's kingdom, are the ones who bring honor. Those who disregard God's way, who give him no attention, who pay him no heed, bring shame. In our world, we are asked, who are the worthy and who are the unworthy? Who has authority and credibility and who lacks? In the world of Jesus, only those who listen, who do God's will, are worthy. And so he says, those who are thought of as the least of these, those who are often not seen first and seldom seen last, will come before those who think that they are worthy of places in God's realm. The first will be last, and the last will be first. And God's kingdom, when it opens up inside of us, will continue to expand hearts and minds and the very world that we dwell in.